McLaren could be the team to beat in Australia, but Ferrari with Hamilton and Leclerc arrive with an ace up its sleeve. And Red Bull? Their dominance could be in jeopardy. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, who do you think will win in Melbourne? Because the data we'll see today may change your mind. McLaren arrives in Australia with a level of expectation that it hasn't had for more than a decade. The evolution that the team showed in the second half of 2024 left clear signs that they could be one of the strongest teams in the new season. However, the data collected in the 2025 preseason has been even more surprising. In the race simulations carried out in Bahrain, Lando Norris recorded paces that would have allowed him to finish approximately 30 seconds ahead of Charles Leclerc over a full race distance. This data has generated a great impact in the paddock because it suggests that McLaren could have found the key to regularly fighting for victories. The improvements implemented in the MCL39 have been key to this performance. The aerodynamic evolution of the car has been focused on optimizing the airflow in the side pods, an area in which the Woking team had already shown important advances in 2024. The new configuration allows greater efficiency in aerodynamic load without compromising speed on straights, a balance that has historically been difficult to achieve in the ground effect era. Another fundamental aspect has been tire management. McLaren was one of the teams that best controlled the degradation of the compounds during the preseason, which gives them a key advantage for circuits where strategy plays a determining role. In Bahrain, the low temperatures could have favored this performance, but the real challenge will be to see if they can replicate it in Melbourne, where the conditions will be noticeably hotter. The Albert Park layout features a combination of medium and high-speed corners, heavy braking zones, and a tarmac that evolves rapidly over the weekend. These characteristics can be a positive factor for McLaren if they manage to maximize the efficiency of their aerodynamic package without compromising stability under braking. In addition, the circuit has historically been a place where tire degradation plays a major role, so their management of the compounds will be key to confirming their status as favorites. For Lando Norris, this is a unique opportunity. If McLaren confirms its performance and manages to be the most competitive team since the start of the season, this could be the year in which it fights for the first victory of the season in Formula One and positions itself as a serious contender for the title. Oscar Piastri, on the other hand, has the advantage of racing at home with a team that seems to give him the tools to fight for the top positions. Their performance will be especially important in gauging the true potential of the MCL39, as if McLaren managed to put both of its drivers in contention for the podium, it will be clear that their preseason performance was not circumstantial. The biggest challenge facing McLaren in Melbourne will be to prove that their advantage in Bahrain was not conditioned by external factors. If they manage to maintain the pace shown in preseason and race conditions, they will be the team to beat in Australia and will set the tone for the 2025 season. However, if higher temperatures affect their performance or if rivals have hidden some of their potential, they could find more competition than expected. One of the keys to the weekend will be their performance in qualifying. If McLaren achieves pole position, they will have the chance to control the race from the front, which could be decisive on a circuit where overtaking remains a challenge, despite the modifications made in recent years. If, on the other hand, they suffer in a one-off stint, their comeback ability and pit strategy will be put to the test from the first race of the year. The data suggests that McLaren has the potential to dominate in Melbourne, but Formula One always finds ways to defy predictions. The first race of the year will be the stage where it is confirmed whether they really are the new favorites or whether the competition will be tighter than the preseason numbers indicated. Ferrari starts the 2025 season with a driver lineup that generates great expectations. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton to the Maranello team marks the beginning of a new era, in which Ferrari is betting on one of the strongest lineups on the grid. With Charles Leclerc consolidated as one of the fastest and most consistent drivers in recent years, and Hamilton looking to regain the prominence that he could not maintain at Mercedes during the ground effect era, the Italian team is in a key strategic position to fight for the championship. The Australian Grand Prix will be the first opportunity to measure the true level of the SF25. During the preseason, Ferrari showed a solid performance, although without the impact that McLaren generated. However, the conditions of the tests in Bahrain may have disguised part of the potential of the car, so the weekend in Melbourne will be essential to know the real hierarchy of the team compared to its rivals. One of the most surprising elements of Ferrari in the preseason has been the modification in the configuration of its suspension. This technical change has the potential to significantly alter the SF25's behavior on circuits such as Albert Park, where stability under braking and traction in low-speed corners play a decisive role. If the new aerodynamic concept succeeds in reducing tire degradation, Ferrari could have a strategic advantage in race conditions. Thermal management will be another key factor. In the 2024 season, Ferrari showed weaknesses in tire degradation in extreme heat conditions, which cost them victories on several occasions. In Australia, with temperatures considerably higher than those in Bahrain, it will be essential to see if the team has managed to solve this problem. Good race pace, combined with a successful pit strategy, could put Ferrari in direct contention for victory. The internal duel between Leclerc and Hamilton will be another focus of the weekend. Leclerc arrives with the confidence of having led Ferrari in recent years and with the experience of having won in Melbourne in 2022. Hamilton, for his part, faces the challenge of quickly adapting to a completely new team, although his first statements have been optimistic, assuring that he feels more comfortable with the SF25 than he was at any time with Mercedes during the ground effect era. The performance of both drivers in qualifying will be a first indication of how the team's dynamics stand. If Leclerc manages to win in the one-off session, he will maintain his status as a benchmark within Ferrari, but if Hamilton is able to match or surpass his pace from the first race, the team's narrative will change completely. This situation will be especially relevant in strategic terms, as Ferrari will have to internally manage the fight for leadership without compromising its competitiveness against McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes. In terms of race pace, Ferrari will need to show that it can compete with McLaren, which arrives in Australia with a car that seems to have a slight advantage in pure performance. However, if Melbourne conditions favor the SF25's tire management, the Italian team could tip the balance in its favor with a more efficient strategy. Another key factor will be the start. Albert Park is a circuit where the first few laps are often decisive, as overtaking is not easy despite the inclusion of several DRS zones. If Ferrari can get into a favorable position from the start, it will be able to play with pace management and tire strategy to keep its rivals at bay. Recent history shows that Ferrari has been able to take advantage of opportunities in Melbourne. In 2022, Leclerc dominated the race with an impeccable performance, while in 2024, Carlos Sainz took victory on a weekend where Red Bull had mechanical problems. This positive trend generates optimism within the team, but also adds pressure to capitalize on any opportunity that presents itself. The fight for the podium in Australia appears to be between McLaren and Ferrari, with Red Bull in a position of uncertainty due to the problems detected in pre-season. If Ferrari can execute a solid qualifying and maintain a consistent pace in the race, it can start the season with a result that strengthens its title bid. The first race of the year will serve to assess whether the Italian team has taken the definitive step towards absolute competitiveness or if it still needs to fine-tune its skills to challenge McLaren and Red Bull in the fight for the championship. Red Bull heads into the Australian Grand Prix with more uncertainty than at any start to the season in recent years. After dominating Formula One with authority since 2022, their pre-season in Bahrain has raised doubts about whether they can maintain their hegemony in 2025. The Austrian team not only completed fewer laps than any other team during testing, but also faced obvious difficulties in setting up the RB21, with problems with balance and stability under braking. The team led by Christian Horner has introduced several modifications to the car, including a new nose concept and aerodynamic adjustments to the floor. However, these innovations do not seem to have completely solved the problems detected in pre-season. During testing in Bahrain, Max Verstappen struggled to find an optimal setup point, showing unstable behavior in low-speed corners and hard braking zones, aspects that will be crucial in Melbourne. The Red Bull RB21 remains a car with huge potential, but the lack of consistency in race simulations has raised alarm bells in the paddock. One of the most worrying factors is the apparent loss of efficiency in tire management, an area in which Red Bull has historically been dominant. If the problems detected in Bahrain are replicated in Australia, compound degradation could become a significant disadvantage to McLaren and Ferrari. Another aspect to consider is the impact of the new aerodynamic regulations and their effect on the team's performance. Red Bull has based its dominance on a highly optimized design philosophy around ground effect, but the changes to the regulations may have reduced some of its competitive advantage. While it is possible that the team is hiding some of its real performance, the lack of consistency shown in testing suggests that they could be facing genuine problems adapting to the new conditions. Max Verstappen faces the start of the season with the pressure of continuing to lead the team at a time when Red Bull looked more vulnerable than in previous years. The three-time world champion has repeatedly demonstrated his ability to extract the maximum performance from any car, but if the RB21 is not at the level of McLaren and Ferrari in Melbourne, his ability to challenge for victory will depend on external factors such as strategy and tire management. For Liam Lawson, the Australian Grand Prix represents his first race as a full-time Red Bull driver after replacing Sergio Perez for the 2025 season. Although the New Zealander has already had experience in Formula One as a reserve driver, this will be his true test under pressure in one of the most demanding teams on the grid. His performance in qualifying will be an important benchmark to measure his adaptation to the RB21, and his pace in the race will determine whether Red Bull has a strong enough lineup to challenge for the Constructors' Championship. The first race of the year always presents uncertainties, but preseason data suggests that Red Bull arrives in Australia with more questions than answers. If they can find the right setup for the RB21 and Verstappen can maximize his qualifying performance, they can still hope to challenge for victory. However, if the problems detected in Bahrain carry over to Melbourne, the team could start the season in an unexpectedly defensive position, forcing a rapid evolution of the car in order not to lose ground to McLaren and Ferrari in the fight for the title. Mercedes arrives at the Australian Grand Prix with a mix of expectations and doubts. After a period of absolute dominance between 2014 and 2021, the team has gone through years of transition in which its performance has fluctuated between fighting for podiums and development problems that prevented it from competing for championships. With the departure of Lewis Hamilton and the addition of Kimi Antonelli, the Brackley-based team is entering a new era in which George Russell assumes the role of leader as they look to regain their status on the grid. Pre-season left mixed signals about the potential of the Mercedes W15. During testing in Bahrain, the car showed solid performance in low-temperature conditions, similar to what happened at the 2024 Las Vegas Grand Prix, where the team achieved one of its best performances of the year. However, the question remains how the car will behave in hot conditions, a key aspect in Melbourne, where higher temperatures and demanding tire management are expected. Mercedes has introduced significant technical innovations to its car, including 2 different nose configurations and a double variant of side pods. These modifications reflect a flexible approach to the development of the car, seeking to adapt to different track conditions throughout the year. In addition, the suspension of the W15 has been the subject of analysis in the paddock, as the team has opted for an unconventional configuration that could make the difference on highly aerodynamically demanding circuits such as Albert Park. George Russell faces the season with the responsibility of leading Mercedes in its attempt to return to the fight for victories. With Hamilton's departure, the Briton has the opportunity to establish himself as the team's benchmark, but also the pressure of proving that he can lead the team to consistent results. His performance in qualifying will be key, as in previous seasons he has shown speed in single stints, but has struggled in tire management in the race. Kimi Antonelli makes his debut in Formula One as the youngest driver on the grid and with the expectation of being one of the great promises of the category. His rise has been meteoric and Mercedes have bet heavily on his talent, giving him a starting seat without going through Formula 2. This is a huge challenge as he will have to adapt quickly to the top category in a highly competitive environment. Antonelli's performance in Melbourne will be closely watched by analysts and rivals. If he manages to get close to Russell's pace from the first race, it will confirm the potential that has taken him to Mercedes in record time. However, if he struggles to find the optimal pace, the team will have to manage his progression carefully to avoid excessive pressure in his first season. In the midfield, the fight is tighter than ever. Alpine has shown progress in pre-season, with an innovative side pod design that has caught the attention of technical specialists. Williams, meanwhile, has raised expectations with a car that seems to have made a leap in quality, although its actual performance in the race remains unknown. Aston Martin is one of the biggest unknowns of the year. After a promising start to 2023, their development lost effectiveness in the second half of the season and they now face doubts about their real competitiveness. The team has opted for innovative aerodynamic solutions, such as a hidden cooling system and a unique engine cover design on the grid. However, the first signs in pre-season have not been entirely encouraging, and Melbourne will decide whether they are in a position to fight for podiums or whether they have fallen back in the hierarchy. Haas, Sauber and Racing Bulls seem to be at the back of the grid, although the first race of the year usually brings surprises. The evolution of these teams will largely depend on their development capacity during the season and their adaptation to circuits that favor their aerodynamic configurations. For Mercedes, the Australian Grand Prix represents an opportunity to evaluate their true level against McLaren, Ferrari and Red Bull. If they manage to minimize tire degradation and maintain a competitive pace in the race, they could be in the fight for the podium. If, on the other hand, their problems with high temperatures persist, they could be relegated to the midfield battle alongside Alpine and Williams. The performance of Russell and Antonelli will be decisive for the immediate future of the team. A standout performance in Melbourne would consolidate Mercedes as a serious contender for the season, while a difficult start would force rapid adjustments in the development of the W15 to avoid losing ground from the first races. The Australian Grand Prix will mark the start of a season that promises to be one of the most uncertain in recent years. Pre-season has left more questions than answers, and, although McLaren seems to have taken the lead in terms of performance, Ferrari and Red Bull remain contenders with the potential to defy any predictions. Mercedes, for its part, represents an unknown that could surprise if it manages to transfer its good performance in cold conditions to the reality of a circuit with higher temperatures and asphalt that evolves quickly during the weekend. McLaren arrive in Melbourne as favorites after a pre-season test in which they left very positive impressions. Their pace in race simulations was the strongest of all the teams, with a performance that allowed them to record times considerably better than those of Ferrari and Red Bull. The key to their success lies in the aerodynamic evolution of the MCL39, which has improved the efficiency of the airflow over the side pods, optimizing speed on straights without compromising stability in high-speed corners. In addition, their tire management has been exceptional, which could give them a strategic advantage on a circuit where degradation will be a determining factor. However, the big question is whether they will be able to replicate this performance in real race conditions and whether the increase in temperature in Australia will affect their performance. Ferrari appears to be McLaren's closest rival, with a driver lineup that generates enormous expectations. The arrival of Lewis Hamilton to the Italian team has raised the team's morale, and their adaptation to the SF25 has been faster than expected. Charles Leclerc, meanwhile, continues to establish himself as one of the fastest drivers in qualifying and with a positive record in Melbourne, having taken victory in 2022. Technically, Ferrari has implemented changes to the suspension setup that could be decisive in how the car handles hard braking and low-speed corners, something crucial at Albert Park. However, tire management remains one of its main weaknesses, and if they have not managed to correct this problem, they could find themselves in difficulties in the later stages of the race. Red Bull arrives in Australia in an unexpected position, with worrying signs suggesting that its dominance could be at risk. The RB21 has shown balance and stability problems in pre-season testing, and the team has completed the fewest laps in Bahrain. Max Verstappen remains the strongest driver on the grid, and his ability to extract maximum performance from any car cannot be underestimated, but if the car is not up to the level of McLaren and Ferrari in terms of pure pace, his fight for victory will depend on external factors such as strategy and potential mistakes from his rivals. In addition, the inclusion of Liam Lawson as a regular driver adds an element of uncertainty, as this will be his first Grand Prix as a Red Bull driver, and he will have to prove whether he can match the team in a high-pressure scenario. Mercedes is the big unknown of the season. In cold conditions, the W15 has shown promising signs, but the big question is how it will perform in higher temperatures and with a track that will constantly evolve throughout the weekend. George Russell has the opportunity to consolidate his position as team leader after Hamilton's departure, but attention will also be on the debut of Kimi Antonelli, who will face the pressure of being the youngest driver on the grid and of proving that he can meet the expectations that Mercedes has placed on him. If the team manages to mitigate tire degradation and optimize strategy, they could surprise and sneak into the podium fight, but if their problems persist, they could be relegated to the midfield fight with Alpine and Williams. The battle in the midfield will be another key point of the Grand Prix. Alpine has shown interesting progress with an innovative side pod design, while Williams has raised expectations with a car that seems to have made a competitive leap. Aston Martin, which started strongly in 2023 but lost performance in the second half of 2024, arrives with doubts about its ability to stay in the fight for pole positions. Haas, Sauber and Racing Bull seem destined to occupy the back of the grid, although the first race of the year often brings surprises that could temporarily alter the established order. The strategic factor will be decisive in Australia. Tire degradation has been a recurring problem at Albert Park, and the teams that manage to extend their runs without losing performance will have a significant advantage. Qualifying will also play a key role, as although the circuit has been modified to facilitate overtaking, grid position remains decisive in maximizing chances of a good result. The race predictions point to Lando Norris as the main candidate for pole position, with a high probability of at least one McLaren finishing on the podium. Ferrari have strong arguments to challenge for victory if they manage to control tire degradation, while Red Bull will face their first big test to determine whether they remain the team to beat or if their dominance begins to weaken. Mercedes, although with less media pressure than in previous years, could be the surprise of the weekend if they manage to maximize their performance in warm conditions. The Australian Grand Prix will not only define who takes the lead in the fight for the championship, but will also serve to reveal which teams have best interpreted the evolution of the technical regulations and who will need immediate adjustments to stay in the fight. The 2025 season is about to begin and, with it, the possibility of a change in the hierarchy of Formula One.